A country can be clinically dead. Its financial organs completely shut down, its sovereignty stripped to the bone, while its citizens still commute to work, its central bank continues printing money, and its army marches in immaculate parades. State collapse does not always look like tanks rolling through the streets. Sometimes nobody notices the corpse for years.
The distortion we operate under, the trap we all fall into, is assuming state collapse is loud. We expect this apocalyptic civil war or some sudden televised revolution. But our analysis of the open-source intelligence on Mozambique reveals a much darker alternative. We are looking at the architecture of the zombie state. The death of a nation can be a mathematically engineered, silent event, simply because a hollowed-out, deceased country is incredibly profitable to pilot.
So for you listening, our mission today is to trace the exact mechanism of this institutional death. We're going straight to the autopsy table to follow the timeline. We're going to identify the actors who assassinated an entire system and unmask the cartels currently living on the corpse. So let's unpack this. We need to start with the time of death.
The clinical time of death is pinpointed to a specific month, April 2016. That is the moment the International Monetary Fund officially froze its credit line to Mozambique.
Just froze it completely.
Shut it down. The trigger was the sudden discovery of $2 billion in hidden sovereign guarantees.
I want to pause right there because that term sounds like, I don't know, boring financial jargon. But it is actually the murder weapon because a sovereign guarantee essentially means the government co-signs a massive loan for a private or state-backed company. And if that company defaults, the taxpayers of the entire country are suddenly on the hook for the bill. But how do you hide $2 billion of that from the IMF?
You hide it behind a carefully constructed patriotic facade. The government just bypassed the national parliament entirely. They spun up these state-backed proxy companies with names like Proindicus, Ematum, and Mozambique Asset Management.
Sounds very official.
It's extremely official. And the public narrative was that Mozambique was borrowing this money to build a high-tech national tuna fishing fleet. They said it was coupled with advanced maritime security to protect their coastline from piracy.
Reading through the case files you brought for this deep dive, the physical reality of what they actually bought is just absurd. It is the equivalent of taking out a massive, secret, second mortgage on your family home. You tell your family you're buying a luxury yacht to charter out and make a fortune, but what actually arrives in the driveway are a few rusty dinghies.
That is essentially what happened.
They purchased these Ocean Eagle 43 patrol boats.
Yeah.
And the documents show they were armed with heavy machine guns, which made them completely useless for commercial tuna fishing. The entire fleet was just left to rust in Maputo's harbor.
The fleet was merely the narrative cover to justify the debt. The natural assumption when you see a failed project of this magnitude is systemic failure. You assume, well, bureaucratic incompetence or perhaps some development initiative gone tragically wrong.
I mean, looking at a fleet of rusting boats, I would normally assume it was just a terrible investment decision by an overwhelmed developing government.
That assumption is the first trap, because this was not a failure, it was a targeted hit. The finance minister at the time, Manuel Chang, deliberately kept this off the books. He unilaterally signed the documents guaranteeing this $2 billion debt.
Unilaterally, without anyone else signing off.
He legally bound the nation without parliamentary approval. And for acting as the inside man for signing the nation's death warrant, he personally received $7 million in direct bribes, routed seamlessly through American and European bank accounts.
$7 million for him, $2 billion in terminal debt for the country. I actually saw in the source documents that he just received a 102-month sentence in a Brooklyn federal court for this exact scheme. But if the inside man opens the vault from within, I am trying to figure out who is waiting outside. If you have international banks institutions like Credit Suisse and the Russian bank VTB lending $2 billion to a country for tuna boats, didn't their risk departments flag this? It seems like the banks were defrauded by a corrupt local official and just lost their investment.
Consider the exact opposite. The creditors engineered the vault door. They engaged in a predatory financial mechanism known as loan pushing. They bypassed fundamental regulatory norms to force more debt onto the borrower than was logically necessary or sustainable. They structured the syndicate to lock in astronomical profits before a single cent of the actual debt was ever scheduled to be repaid.
Wait, how does the math on something like that actually work? How do you profit from a loan before the borrower even starts paying it back?
You siphon the capital before it ever reaches the destination. The banks and the contractors structured the deal so they took their cut directly out of the loan principal before the money even left Europe or the Middle East.
Oh, wow.
They overcharged for the maritime equipment by a staggering $713 million.
$713 million.
Then they buried another $141 million in opaque contractor fees, and the banks themselves pocketed $92 million purely in banking and transaction fees. The capital was routed directly to contractor accounts in the United Arab Emirates. It completely bypassed the Mozambican treasury.
So Mozambique owed interest on money they never even received. That is a heist disguised as a sovereign bond. Not a single dollar of that $2 billion touched the Mozambican economy, but the Mozambican people were left holding the bag.
By late 2016, the consequences of that missing capital hit the host body. Inflation spikes to 24.2%. The debt-to-GDP ratio shatters the 128% mark. The national currency, the medical, goes into free fall. The cost of basic food staples skyrockets overnight.
Complete economic collapse.
And when a macroeconomic shock of this scale occurs, you expect the central bank to step in. You expect them to stabilize the patient, to act as the lender of last resort.
The central bank is supposed to be the adult in the room. They hold the fire extinguisher when the economy is burning down.
Instead, they engaged in what can only be described as institutional cannibalism. The central bank governor, Rogerio Zandamela, used the crisis to execute a corporate raid. He illegally seized control of Moza Banco, which is the fourth largest commercial bank in the country.
He just seized it.
He bypassed constitutional publication norms, forced the bank into administration, and handed the entire seized entity over to a structure called Kuhanha.
Let me stop you there because the mechanics of this are mind-boggling. What exactly is Kuhanha?
It is the central bank's own internal pension fund.
The regulator ate the regulated. That is the equivalent of the chief firefighter showing up to your burning house, ignoring the flames, and stealing your flat-screen TV to furnish the firehouse lounge.
The Administrative Court of Mozambique eventually ruled the entire intervention unconstitutional and legally void, but the damage was permanent. The institutional organs had sequentially failed. The central bank lost its regulatory function, the commercial banking system closed in on itself, the national budget defaulted, and international donors withdrew completely.
This brings us to a massive logical contradiction in the source material, because if the state's central bank has cannibalized itself, the national budget has defaulted, and the currency is practically worthless, it logically makes zero sense for foreign corporations to keep doing business there. So how do we explain the massive multi-billion-dollar offshore liquefied natural gas projects in the north of the country? Companies like TotalEnergies and ExxonMobil are still there, running mega projects, pulling resources out of the ground in a dead economy.
Those gas projects do not operate within the dying Mozambican economy. They exist in an offshore, fully dollarized ecosystem. They operate through international clearing accounts.
For those of us who aren't international bankers, what exactly is a clearing account in this context? How does the money physically avoid the local economy?
A clearing account acts as an offshore holding pen. When a buyer purchases Mozambican gas, they pay in US dollars into a bank account held in London or New York. The multinational energy company takes its share, and the portion owed to Mozambique never enters the local banking system.
It just stays offshore.
It completely bypasses the collapsing local currency, the medical, which is crashing just outside their perimeter fences.
So they completely detach themselves from the host body.
The traditional concept of taxation disappears. The revenues do not flow into a national treasury to build schools, pave roads, or maintain a healthcare system. They are paid as direct rent to a microscopic political elite in Maputo. It is a pure transactional exchange. Corporate loyalty and direct offshore payments in exchange for exclusive access to the resource.
The state as a provider of public goods is dead.
The state as a gatekeeper to resources remains highly functional.
But a fundamental definition of a state is holding the monopoly on violence. A state has to protect its own borders. If the National Army, the FADM, collapsed, which the intelligence reports show they did, they lost logistical cohesion and ceded control of the northern Cabo Delgado province to insurgents, how is this pristine, dollarized gas bubble being protected?
You outsource your sovereignty. To protect the gas fields, the state essentially rented a foreign military. The European Union is currently paying 20 million euros out of its Peace Facility Fund.
Peace Facility.
That money goes directly to fund the Rwandan Defense Force to deploy troops and occupy northern Mozambique to secure the extraction zones.
We need to map this out carefully because it completely redefines what a country even is. The European Union is using a peace facility fund to pay the Rwandan army to secure a perimeter in Mozambique so that French and American gas companies can extract resources.
That is the mechanical reality of the geopolitics on the ground. And furthermore, Rwanda is not simply providing security as a diplomatic favor. The Rwandan state party holding company, Crystal Ventures Limited, has moved in to monopolize the economic corpse.
I was reading about this in the OSINT briefing. They didn't just send troops, they sent a corporate armada.
They dominate the supply chain through a network of proxy companies. They took over private security contracts through a firm called ISCO. They dominate lucrative civilian construction contracts around the gas sites with a company named Radarscape.
So they're building the infrastructure too.
They are even extracting graphite for batteries through a mining entity. The military forces hold the tactical perimeter, and the corporate arm extracts the economic value.
So the north is occupied by Rwandan forces and transnational gas companies. What happens to the Mozambican citizens living in the south of that province, the people who do not live inside the dollarized gas camps?
They are entirely abandoned by the apparatus in Maputo. Southern villages have resorted to forming local independent militias. Groups like the Naparama, acting entirely independently from any state structure, using basic weapons to fend off insurgent attacks. They are living in a stateless vacuum while high-tech dollarized extraction continues just miles away.
If the northern gas fields are sealed off, what happens to the empty shell of the rest of the country? Mozambique has massive coastal infrastructure. They have deep water ports that used to handle international shipping.
The unpoliced ports, specifically Nacala and Pemba, have been repurposed by different actors. They now form what intelligence analysts call the Heroin Coast.
The Heroin Coast.
The hollowed-out state infrastructure provides the perfect, consequence-free transit hub. It is used to move hundreds of kilos of Afghan heroin and methamphetamine down the eastern seaboard to South Africa and up to European markets.
The physical ports are still there, the cranes still operate, the customs booths are manned, but the cargo has fundamentally changed.
The political elite in Maputo is deeply sustained by this shadow economy. The drug money provides the crucial liquidity that the IMF and international donors withdrew back in 2016. It buys the silence and loyalty of the remaining customs officials. It pays off the hollowed-out security apparatus. The cartel revenue acts as the artificial life support keeping the political elite functioning.
So the ultimate beneficiaries are the syndicates running the logistics, laundering these massive transit fees.
The data trail on this is hiding in plain sight. We know the capital is being funneled into luxury real estate in Dubai. The transaction logs tracking the dollar movements of these front logistics companies operating out of Pemba are sitting right now in the U.S. FinCEN database.
Wait, so the U.S. government actually has the digital paper trail in the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network servers. They know exactly who is profiting from this dead state, but they aren't acting on it.
The digital records exist, the dollar movements are mapped.
But exactly whose names are on those Dubai property deeds? That is a dark web of corporate facades and offshore shell companies we will have to leave unopened for now.
If we pull back and look at the broader implications.
For you listening, sitting perhaps halfway across the world, it is incredibly easy to view the institutional death of Mozambique as an isolated tragedy, a localized failure on a distant continent. Why should you care about this specific collapse?
Because a rotting institution is highly toxic to its neighbors. The capital generated by the transnational narcotics syndicate flowing freely through Mozambique's ghost ports does not stay within those borders. It is physically destroying South African urban centers. It is corrupting their law enforcement networks and severely destabilizing the political system of the region's largest economy. Contagion is inevitable.
The terrifying reality we uncovered in these sources is not just that Mozambique failed. The true horror is that this is a highly successful, easily replicable 21st century business model.
A dead state, stripped of all social obligations to its citizens, yet incredibly rich in natural resources, is the perfect host organism. It is the most profitable environment for transnational cartels and foreign private militaries to operate within. There is no regulatory friction. There is no democratic accountability. There is only extraction.
We are seeing the next victim being prepped for this exact procedure right now. The identical architecture bartering sovereign security to foreign mercenary groups like Wagner and the Rwandan Expeditionary Forces in exchange for uncontrolled resource extraction of gold and diamonds is reaching the point of no return in the Central African Republic. The zombie state franchise is expanding its territory.
The blueprint is proven, and the methodology is highly efficient.
When you look at the international news tonight and see a struggling nation, ask yourself, are they actually failing? Or is a hidden syndicate highly motivated to keep the corpse walking?